Hello, dreamers. This is Lisa Hayes with Dreams for Society. And with me today is Jeff Stant, Executive Director of the Indiana Forest Alliance. Jeff is with us today in his own capacity, and he's going to tell us how he got to be where he is today as Executive Director of the Indiana Forest Alliance. But before you do that, would you tell us a little bit about yourself prior to becoming the Executive Director of the Indiana Forest Alliance, Jeff?
Sure. Well, thank you.
You're welcome.
Lisa, for having me on to do this interview. And I've given it some thought, and I have a deep, abiding love for nature and nature in Indiana. And I think this all started out as a child. My parents were avid outdoors lovers, and we took lots of, actually I spent 5 years in Asia as a kid, hiking through the woods and the mountains of Korea and Japan, particularly with my parents, and very fortunate kid. And then when we moved back to Indiana, my folks bought land in the 50s in Brown County. We used to visit it regularly. In the 60s and 70s, we lived in Indianapolis in the suburbs in Zionsville, but went down to Brown County as often as we could, and I just spent all of my spare time tromping the woods and the creeks all over central Indiana and in Brown County, and gained a very strong love of nature, and particularly the nature in Indiana, the richness of it. So that's my background in terms of how I gained this feeling for our forests. When I went to college, there would already been simmering a political issue over whether or not to set aside part of the Hoosier National Forest, which stretches from Brown County all the way to the Ohio River. It's our largest public forest in the state, by far. One of the smallest national forests in the country, but in Indiana it's the largest public forest that there is. And there was an issue about whether to set some of it aside as what's called an eastern wilderness area. And I became very involved in that issue, and spent much of my college years actually knocking on doors of neighbors in the northern end of the Hoosier National Forest, landowners, talking to them about it, speaking to local organizations about it. I ended up directing an ad hoc grassroots organization called the Salt Creek Wilderness Coalition, and we, after about 8 attempts to get legislation through the U.S. Congress, we finally got the Charles Dean Wilderness established in 1982. And the night that wilderness bill passed, and it was one of the only ones Ronald Reagan signed that night, I got a phone call from Washington that the wilderness had been created. I broke up with my college sweetheart and flunked my last college exam in physics, all in that night. So that was kind of a strong milestone night for me back in 1982.
Turning point.
Right. And so I've been working in the public interest area for various nonprofit groups, ranging from the National Taxpayers Union to the Citizens Coal Council to the Environmental Integrity Project, on a more national level, to groups like Hoosier Environmental Council, Protect Our Woods, and this Sierra Club, way back at the beginning of my activism days on the wilderness fight. And then most recently Indiana Forest Alliance since 2013 onward. I also spent about 10 years working on issues related largely to coal and our reliance on coal and the problems that creates for the environment, the destruction and the destruction of really the human condition, the quality of life of people and their health, and the contamination of water systems from it. And was very active in the effort to get a national regulation for the tremendous amounts of toxic waste that power plants produce when they burn coal. And of course Indiana relies on coal, so this huge coal ash dumps all over the state. And a lot of that ash is dumped right along our rivers, right over the most important public water supply aquifers in the state. So it's real important that we get these regulations. I spent about 10 years on that before I finally decided I'd contributed enough to that effort and needed to get back to what really stirs me, which is our forests. And so when the Indiana Forest Alliance, which was started in the 1990s, 1996 actually, when they said, look, we'd like to hire you to be the executive director of IFA to try to really build it into a stronger organization in 2013, I decided to take them up on it.
And Indiana has a lot of natural forest land opposed to other states in the country, correct?
Yeah, it was at one time more than 85% covered in forest. It was the heart of the largest temperate hardwood forest on the planet Earth. It was not another place in the world where there was a more vast expanse of hardwood forests than right here in Indiana. And it became the center of the nation's timber industry right after statehood in 1816 on. A huge logging effort that went on that stripped the state virtually bare by the turn of the century, from the 19th to the 20th century. Since then, the state took measures that have helped it reforest. There was also a situation where a lot of the forests were cut down for farms that were on marginal ground for farming, on hilly ground. It was very erodible. So these farms were washed out by the time the Depression hit, and they were essentially abandoned. So there was a large part of reforestation that occurred just naturally over time from that. Okay. So today we have about 5 million acres of our forested return. That's about 22% of the state now is reforested from what was about 85%. So it was almost eliminated entirely from 20 million acres down to less than 1 million. Now it's back to nearly 5 million acres, which is a lot of reforestation, but there's a lot more that could happen, and we would all be better off for it, in my view, if it did.
And how much of the 22% regaining of the forest land in Indiana is private versus public?
About 85% of that 5 million acres is privately owned. The large preponderance is in private woodlots owned by farmers or people who have second homes or just places that they bought that they'd like to have as their own woodlands. And Indiana has it has the oldest classified forest program in the nation. And this is something people don't realize. What that is a program where if a private woodland owner agrees not to develop their woods, they can still practice forestry on it, but they just can't cut the trees down and start farming the area or put houses in it. If they agree to do that, their property taxes are reduced to $1 an acre. Oh, and today in Indiana we have as many acres actually in the classified forest. It's actually been expanded and it's now called the Classified Forest and Wildlands Program. But we have as many acres in that program as we do actually owned by the state of forests that they're protecting. So that creates a larger reservoir, if you will, of reforested land, because there's this incentive for private woodland owners to enroll in the classified forest program and keep their woods, which is a great thing. Indiana should be proud of that. And that was established back at the same time that the state forests were established.
And this is an Indiana law.
In Indiana, in 1904. So it's more than 100 years old. The state forests are more than 100 years old. We were one of the first states to establish state forests. And what that says is that we actually have been a state that have had visionaries on the environment in the past. A century ago, people like Colonel Richard Lieber, Charles Dean, Henry Cowles. These were ecologists and foresters and conservationists 100 years ago who roamed the state and realized how beautiful it was, and that preservation of forests, the restoration of forests and their preservation was actually really important to the health and well-being of the state. and its people.
Mm-hmm.
And they set out to create programs to bring those forests back, but those programs have suffered in recent years. They've become static. The state park system in Indiana is actually a good deal smaller than most surrounding states. Our state forest system, while it's one of the oldest, is a good deal smaller than states like New Jersey or Maryland or Massachusetts that are a fraction of the size of the state of Indiana.
That's not proportionate?
Well, they have far greater acreages in those states that they have put in state forests since they were established, and they were established later. But they've overtaken us and moved far beyond what Indiana's done. And that's in part that we just not have the vision to keep moving forward with our state forests and creating more of them. For example, when they created the state forests in the beginning of the 20th century, the creators of them envisioned a 500,000 acre system of state forests for Indiana. Today, 110 years later, 111 years later, we have 158,000 acres of state forests. And most of that, the great preponderance of that was created back when those guys started the effort 100 years ago. Then around the 1960s, it just all flattened off, and it became seen as a luxury in the General Assembly and in various gubernatorial administrations' budgets to have any land acquisition money for state forests or other public lands. So they haven't expanded, and meanwhile, the urban lands of the state and the suburban lands have mushroomed, and the state's population has grown greatly since then, close to 7 million people now, more than 2 to 3 times the number of Hoosiers that existed 110 years ago. And we aren't buying the park and the conservation land to make it so that our kids can enjoy what we have the opportunity to enjoy. You know, we don't want to encourage people to trespass on private land. So they're supposed to go to the state forest and the national forest or the state parks, but we're not providing nearly enough of that type of land for people to be able to get away from it all when they go to those areas. They're crowded, or in the case of the state forest today now, they're logging at a rate that's 1,000% greater than they were logging them 10 years ago or ever logged them before that. They've under the previous administration and the current administrations, they've decided that the state forests should pay for themselves, pay for all of the staff of the Division of Forestry from the trees that grow in them. So instead of protecting the forest for public values, for their ecological values or their public use values, the forests are seen as a source of revenue, a timber supply. And so we're cutting down trees that have reached the century mark, and in another 20 to 30 years would be considered old-growth forests. But instead, we're going to deny the next 5 generations of the opportunity to ever see that and just use them as a revenue source for the Division of Forestry. It raises the basic question, why should the Division of Forestry, or for that matter, the state forest, even exist if that's their only purpose? So, you know, my vision is about bringing back a balanced management of the state forest that recognizes they're for a higher purpose than just providing a cheap supply of saw timber for private timber buyers, and they don't depend on them anyway. 5% of all the logs milled in Indiana are actually from the state forests. They could do with not a stick of lumber in the state forest, and it wouldn't hurt them at all. Even where the state forests are, there are more private wooded acres available for timbering. So they could leave them alone entirely, and it wouldn't hurt any timber buyer or timber mill in the state. And they know this, but they're logging to try to create a budget. So my vision is about bringing back balance, and that's what I'm passionate about. Well, what I'm passionate about is wild nature. And we need to bring back balance to the management of our public lands, particularly our state forests, because they provide really the only opportunity for the public to experience what wild nature is like in Indiana. So few people recognize how rich it is. or know about it. On one elevation in an Indiana woodlot, there is more biodiversity than in 10,000 feet of elevational change out west.
Really?
Yeah, our temperate hardwood forests have some of the greatest insect diversity on the planet, a greater salamander diversity than in the tropical rainforests, more wood warblers than anywhere else on the planet. Those are deep, very colorful songbirds in the forest that have to exist, that can only exist if you maintain deep enough forest. A bat diversity that's astounding. Different kinds of shrews that were just discovered only in the 1980s are in the Indiana forest, deep in the Brown County Hills forest woodlands. These and many other different kinds of small mammals and birds and fish and insects and aquatic insects and fungi and vascular plants and mosses, or what we call bryophytes and non-vascular plants. The diversity is astounding, and that's something that Hoosiers are just not aware of. The Indiana Dunes National Lakeshore, it's one of the smallest national parks in the country, 14,000 acres. Sounds like a lot to most Hoosiers, but they don't know how small that is relative to the acreage of most national parks. It's one of the smallest. It has the third highest level of biodiversity of all the national parks in the country. It's amazing. Only I think the Great Smoky Mountains and I forget which other national park have a greater biodiversity than the Indiana Dunes National Lakeshore. And yet it's tiny relative to those vast expanses. So that tells you what's out there in our forests. Our nature is intense, and it's today's leaders across our society, I don't think, appreciate that level of intensity and how important it is to our own spiritual health and our physical health. There have been all kinds of studies that document that people that spend time out in the woods actually are happier. They're more physically fit.
I read that.
And so what I'm talking about as far as a vision, how you would feel in that vision is just feeling healthier, feeling freer. Like you can walk out into a woods with your child and spend the entire day just walking up this stream valley and camp wherever you want to camp at the end of that day, and teach them how to camp. Teach them how to orienteer with that compass. Teach them how to make a cane pole and fish if the stream has fish. That is what we're talking about when we're talking about protecting large amounts of the state forest and the national forest from commercial logging and road building. It's leaving enough land for you to just experience nature. And you can't do that in the state parks and the nature preserves. They're tiny. They're a third of 1% of the state's land area. You can't camp outside of a developed campground. You can't pick a mushroom. You're not supposed to let your dog off its leash. You can't even walk off the trail. And these areas, they have all kinds of infrastructure in them. People don't know that in the middle of our state parks, for example, in the middle of the Chain of Lakes State Park, in its deepest nature preserve, there's actually a large Indiana Department of Corrections prison there. Or in the middle of the Fort Bend State Park, there's a major public well field. Or that there's all kinds of other infrastructure when you try to hike into the depths of these parks. If you illegally hike off trail and bushwhack, that you run right into roads and different residences. And so these things weren't meant, these state parks and nature preserves that we're so proud of, they're beautiful. We should be proud that we created them, but we haven't created nearly enough of them, and they're riddled with infrastructure, and they're not designed for wilderness recreation. Those kinds of pursuits are something that you do on the state forests or the national forests, and we're just not managing for that. We're extinguishing those opportunities there with all this commercial logging and road building, and we're not expanding these systems. They're scattered, they're small, and yet we're trying to treat them like they're huge industrial pulp or wood producers for private industry, which has more than enough land to do that with in Indiana that it owns. So, could go on and on and on, but I think you asked me once, well, how does your vision feel? Well, my vision about Indiana is like a place where you're aware of your place, where you are aware of the character of the land around you and your community. Instead of a place where it's just a sea of sprawl and chain restaurants and chain stores, not that those don't have value, but instead of a place where it only is those things, and it's just small, very young forests that never get to more than a fourth of their age span, natural age span, before they cut down. It's a place that's richer, that has large sugar maples lining the streets, and white oaks and tulip poplars, the trees that made Indiana world famous as far as the quality of its wood. And a place where there is a vibrant timber industry, but it's because the government is helping private woodland owners manage their forest responsibly, not trying to dump wood on the market at half its price from public land, from huge timber sales. A place where we have big rivers in Indiana. There's more water flowing down a typical Indiana river than flows across an entire western state that's 3 or 4 times our size. It's a state that has lots of groundwater and surface water. It's rich in water. Well, that creates rich ecosystems.
Nice.
And so we should be taking advantage of these river corridors. And actually, one of the things I like that Governor Daniels did, he started all this timbering on the state forest to pay for the Division of Forestry staff, which I don't like. But one of the things he did with vision was he created the Healthy Rivers Initiative, where we decided as a state that we were going to buy land along the Wabash River from Terre Haute to Lafayette and up Sugar Creek there, and along the Muscatatuck River in the southeastern part of the state, to create this park corridor there. We should expand that program to all over the state. We could do it on the Pigeon Creek on the boundary of Spencer and Warwick counties in deep southwest Indiana. We could do it along the Whitewater Valley in the southeastern part of the state, the Flat Rock River over there. The West Fork White River from Muncie to Anderson is a beautiful riparian wooded corridor. Rather than flooding it out with another 1950s style reservoir, we should be looking at buying up that land from willing sellers to make it into parkland that would connect Muncie to Anderson and then to the northern suburbs of Indianapolis. If you did that, you could then connect, hikers could hike from Hamilton County through Anderson to Muncie, and it would be like a squirrel crossing the eastern United States. They used to be able to cross a squirrel could go from the Atlantic Ocean to the Mississippi River and never touch the ground because it was forest canopy the entire way. You could walk in nature from Noblesville to Muncie and never leave it, be in deep forests along the White River, which has returned to being one of the best smallmouth bass streams in that stretch in the entire Midwest because of the quality of the water that's come back. And then you could get on the Cardinal Greenway and take it to Richmond, and then you would have gone across the entire eastern, most developed part of the state, where today there's no public parkland, virtually none. And instead you would be able to walk through public land preserved for your enjoyment all the way to Richmond. And that's a vision that is about the beauty of the future and about the beauty that we have here and acting today so that it's there tomorrow for our kids, so that their world is actually more beautiful than what we have. We could create a similar kind of corridor, extend the Wabash corridor all the way to the outskirts of Fort Wayne, and use a small, buy some land and a small divide to then get up to the south branch of the Elkhart River and make a hiking and canoeing trail there all the way up to South Bend, Mishawaka, Elkhart, and then down to the Galena River all the way over to Michigan City through some surprisingly forested amount that has come back to northern Indiana. The Tippecanoe River is a beautiful float stream. There's no reason why from the back of Lake Schaefer all the way to Rochester, you couldn't float that stream and never see a cornfield or a house roof. If the state would just buy land from willing sellers, and we're talking about willing sellers, not condemning people, letting them sell. There's a huge problem with flooding along these rivers. People are in a position where they can't develop the land. It floods constantly as farmland. If the government were in the market to buy from willing sellers, we could create natural corridors in the state that would make it nationally famous and a place that people would want to move to. Indiana is one of the only states its population has reached a plateau and is kind of static, and a lot of it is seen as a Rust Belt state. People leave it to go elsewhere, and its leaders talk about how they're going to lower taxes, and that's how they'll attract companies back. They're leaving out a big part of it, the equation, which is nature. Let nature come back to Indiana.
I think that what I'm hearing from you, what I really loved about your passion and your presentation today about your vision, is that your vision includes the ability to take advantage of existing land from willing sellers. And it will benefit not only the trees and the wildlife, but it will benefit something that is a necessity for humanity, for us, for our energy, for our vitality, for our health. It will benefit us. And once we reveal, and you through your education, your passionate effort, reveal to each other why we need these forests, not just because we want to save some critter in some wildlife area that no one can relate to, but that we're all connected, and that this is really for all of us to thrive. And getting with the Dreams for Society, Imagine, Visualize, and Create template, which you've really flowed really well with that template in your visualization. You've laid out for us the challenges today, the lack of vision amongst our political leaders, looking at just the financial end, the budget, the lack of money, the scarcity in Indiana, and how they're going to pay for the forest attraction of tourists, how they're going to fund those projects. And clear-cutting forests, in your opinion, and I think the viewer's opinion, is not the answer, because that is very short-sighted as to how it's going to affect the ecosystem and our own health and welfare. So getting with the visualization, I love what you're talking about in terms of expanding along the natural areas that we already have, and making these huge trails and deep forestry available to the regular hiker and tourists from out of state. I love that. How can we get there? How can we create, Jeff? Let's imagine that you have all of the co-creators, the volunteers you need, that you've got all the legislators you need to willingly agree to vote for legislation. Let's assume you have your vision mapped out regarding this beautiful idea of Anderson connected to Hamilton County, and Fort Wayne connect. I'm following you, but I don't have the vision. I mean, I don't have all the knowledge, but all these different places connected by buying up already forested land from willing sellers where there's issues for them regarding flooding and that kind of thing. How can we get that done? If we're in the year 2015. Let's assume we fast forward and it's 10 years from now. It's 2025, which seems like so futuristic. Let's assume your vision has happened, that all these new beautiful corridors have sprouted up, and that we've gone from the existing acreage of?
State, they've got about 750,000 acres of public land. And then there's about, and we
Let's just go with the public.
yeah, and that's state land, and there's about 500,000 acres more of federal land, and a couple 100,000 acres of county land. That's so you're talking about
still less than 2 million acres.
Yeah, it's less than 2 million, and the state's 23 million acres.
Right. So you've got way low, like you said, 20%.
Yeah, it's a less public land per capita than most other states.
So let me just ask you first, if we're fast forwarding to the year 2025 and your visualization has come true.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
what percentage will we be? What would be a good balance?
Well, I would think that at least twice the amount of land we currently have.
Let's go beyond that. What would be from a standpoint of the health and welfare of the state of Indiana, not just the trees and the wildlife, but also the human beings that reside here? What would be the optimal balance that, in your mind, in your opinion?
Well, I don't want to discount the contributions that private landowners make.
Exactly.
To this. So it's more about, I think if we increase the public lands of the state by 2 to 3 times,
okay,
that would, we would, and also protected them more, treated them as public land, not something to be mined or for natural resources, for oil, drilled for oil, or you know, quarried for limestone, or mined for coal, or timbered. Right now, you know, it's inaccurate for me to say we're mining our public lands for coal or quarrying them, but what's happening at places like Minnehaha Fish and Wildlife Area, we just lost half of it because it's leased from the coal companies, and they decided they wanted to go ahead and mine the part of it that they never mined. So they ended the lease with the state, and instead of selling the land to the state, which might have been interested in buying it, I mean, it would have been hard to come up with the money, but there was some interest. They just leased it to a new coal company that's going to mine the best part of the Fish and Wildlife Area. So there's this extractive mentality about use of some of our public lands that are leased from large companies. They're not really public land even. And then there's the mentality of that our state forest and national forest should be tree farms. Basically, you know, like a corn crop or a soybean crop. There's the crop for human physical consumption. And that's a problem with a large amount of the public land that is owned by the public, or that these areas are fish and wildlife areas where they're actually treated like they're big giant game farms for chukar, partridge, and rabbit to be shot, and everything is constantly cut down, and there's big bean fields for animals, but there's nothing is allowed to grow to any period of time. So there's a lot of this use of public land for special interests and for interests that want to have some extractive use of resources. We need to value the public land as something higher, and that people in Center Township here and deep in the cities of the state are deprived of green space and just the chance to experience Indiana's natural beauty, and that giving them that chance ought to be the top priority of these public lands, not timbering them or cutting them down to create edge habitats so you can shoot, you know, game more readily. And so there's a mentality change that's needed. And we do need to expand the size of these public lands, but if we could just change the mentality, that would be realizing a lot of the vision I'm talking about.
Right.
I'm not talking about banning hunting on our public lands. I'm just saying they shouldn't be managed like they're a game farm. People should go out and hunt the woods the way we did 100 years ago, and if there's not a lot of turkey in this area, I'm sorry, we're not going to clear cut it to bring turkey in or for grouse in. We're going to, you hunt what's there, and there's not a lot there, you don't hunt it that year. There's a certain arrogance with which we manage these lands that we need to get rid of. But then we do need to expand them, and we need to also encourage private landowners to keep conserving their lands. And I think that if the amazing thing about what I'm saying is that we could bring a lot of primeval wilderness back to Indiana with not too much more effort. It just takes vision and discipline to get there. Another 100,000 acres of land acquisition in southern Indiana would allow us to bring back the black bear and the American elk. And you could hear, you know, the male elk bugling in the fall to bring it. There's enough land that's been purchased at the north end of the Hoosier National Forest and in Brown County and in Lawrence and Jackson counties there, that connecting it up with the massive forest around Crane and Martin County and Lawrence County there, and Martin State Forest and the National Forest there, and Crane Naval Weapons Depot, and then to the lands to the south around Patoka Lake and south of French Lake, going on down into the Anderson River area and the Little Blue River and the lands around Mogan Ridge. There's enough land that with a little bit more acquisition, you could bring back what we call megafauna in southern Indiana. You could bring the elk, the black bear, the river otter already has been brought back. The beaver are fairly plentiful. Wild turkey, deer, these are things that 100 years ago had ceased to exist entirely in the state. They're now fairly common in southern Indiana. The bobcat has come back. The coyote has assumed the role of the wolf in many cases, but there are no bear or elk, but I'm just trying to say, with actually just a little bit more acquisition, could come back. Unless we try to put roads everywhere and create sprawl, which is the vision of the people who built I-69. They want, you know, to liquidate open space in rural area. They consider that poverty, and they want to put a Walmart store at every 10 miles in the state and call that prosperity. What I'm saying is that's not prosperity. That's destroying our heritage and what makes it worth living in Indiana. And with a vision to not pursue that path, but to pursue things like what we call ecological tourism, agritourism. We could preserve our heritage, and with just a little bit more effort to buy some more public land, we actually could bring back symbols of the wilderness in our state. And so I'm not saying, look, let's go about and make a third of Indiana public land. I'm not saying we have to, the timber industry can't cut a tree down. I'm saying that there's a lack of balance, there's an arrogant treatment of our public lands, and that there's no vision to create enough of them to where the state can truly benefit, where the quality of life will be improved. And that with some vision, we could create corridors that could span the entire length of the state. If you actually expanded the Wabash River Initiative, you could go all the way to Fort Wayne and all the way down to Posey County. And there is every year huge flooding in those lands. So there's an incentive. Farmers have an incentive. If their government is in the market when they're ready to sell, there's a lot of those farmers that love the land and would, I think, willingly sell to conservation purposes. When they're ready, if their children don't want the farm passed down to them, which is a problem going on all over America all the time. So we could have a trail all the way down from Fort Wayne to Evansville. If we just had a little bit more discipline and could see that. And so people need to start visualizing that.
Love it.
And so visualizing it would allow us to tell where we want to expand our public lands. I think that we could expand them by 2 to 3 times and get done what I'm talking about. And it would bring parks and forests, most importantly, some of the most diverse forests that ever existed, back to the people of the state of Indiana, and give us something to be as proud of as people from Wyoming are proud of Yellowstone National Park, or people from Tennessee love their Smoky Mountains National Park. You know, we could be proud of what we have here.
We wouldn't just be a bunch of cornfields.
Corn and soybeans and CAFOs, you can find animal feeding operations, and suburbs that make it so you don't know if you were driving through the state and were dropped off in Marion, whether you're in Marion or Kokomo or Terre Haute or Richmond or Whiting or South Bend, or it all looks the same. There's it lacks its character.
Its character, and we as Indiana residents you as a passionate advocate for Indiana forest and the wildlife can help, and all of us can help, the viewers can help educate, now that you've heard the passionate plea that it's time for us to wake up about what's really happening in Indiana, because what I'm hearing you say is that the last few years we've gone on a downturn and there's a lot at risk, and rather than continue the upward turn of protecting and increasing our lands of forest land, we're actually decreasing it as of late, and we have so much potential that we could move forward with. I think the first step is, one of the first steps is you getting out and spreading the word more and more, which you're doing by virtue of this particular interview, and you've got commercials. The Indiana Forest Alliance has commercials that have been broadcast. I just think it's awesome. I've learned so much today that I didn't know heretofore, and I've been part of your meetings and have learned a lot already, I thought. But just listening to you today, I've learned so much more. And at first, it's painful. You don't really want to hear this. You just want to go back into your own little dark corner and forget about it. But we have to start to realize that this is about the health and welfare of the state of Indiana and the residents. But it's not just that. It's about growing Indiana and growing tourism and wanting people to come back into the state. Who wants to come to a bunch of cornfields? But if we come to old growth forests with diversity that's unlike any other, people will want to come and see that. It won't just be Wyoming and other places that we think now, Yellowstone, all of that we think is where we need to go to really see wildlife. It'll be the depths of Indiana forests, and I love that vision, and I think we can get there. I know we can get there. Is there anything you would like to add about how we can create that going forward?
I think that people need to talk about it and tell their local governmental officials, their elected representatives at all levels, that protecting nature and bringing back more of it is a priority. That's what it comes down to. This is we've become so, in many ways, estranged from nature. We've sort of compartmentalized it off into this section of our lives that we want to keep control. You know, people don't like insects, and they don't like thorn bushes, or they don't like. I mean, people often view nature as almost as a 50-50 proposition in terms of negative positive. I think people need to understand we're actually part of nature.
Right.
We can't exist without it. It needs to be healthy for us to be healthy, and that it really, just when it comes down to it on a practical level, where would you like to live if you had your druthers? Would you want to live near a large forest?
I would love it.
That's totally possible to do in Indiana if there is a priority, if it's a priority for public officials. I don't think the mayors of Indianapolis have ever felt it was a priority. Not since Charlie Bookwalter created the park system, you know, a progressive Republican way back, nearly, again, 100 years ago in Indianapolis. You know, he had the vision to think about Kessler Avenue and how that there should be corridors of parks and greenways a long time ago. But you talk to mayors of recent time in the city, and it's as if they think that's all been accomplished. We have Eagle Creek Park. Lilly gave it to Purdue, and Purdue gave it, gave us part of it, so we don't have to worry. Or we have four, but there's no realization of that. Hey, the public needs more, and a part of it is that the public isn't telling them that they need more. The public is struggling to live hand to mouth more and more, and so nature is seen as a luxury. Well, it really isn't. Life just becomes not worth living without it. And so I think that we have to tell public officials at all levels that, hey, we need more of your attention directed to preserving nature and developing economic systems that do that here. And we want you to come up with job creations programs that do that. And there needs to be, this comes down to a political equation. People have to say it's important politically that it get done.
I think so. The people like you, me, and the viewers, And we cannot afford not to fund these types of initiatives that you're talking about, because if we don't, those dollars that we would have spent on increasing our natural preservation, our forests, will be spent on increased healthcare costs. So would we rather enjoy the beautiful nature that's right outside our door, or would we rather be in a hospital bed? Because that is where we're going. Nature is not something that's just for fun. It's an absolute necessity that we stay tuned into a healthy, natural environment.
And people need, I think most Hoosiers would readily agree with that.
Mm-hmm.
But they're told by the DNR that we have this wonderful state park system and all these nature preserves we've created. And you know, there are wonderful nature preserves and state parks in Indiana. But my concern is that the totality of them are so small,
right, that
what we're doing is we're saying, if we accept them at that size, we're saying it's okay for nature to be reduced to such a token level of existence that to experience it like you go to a museum. It's so reduced down in size that it's token.
But all the old stuff has been removed,
Yeah.
so it's not even given a chance to mature.
Doesn't even exist, right?
So I've just recently heard we need to be deep into forest areas where the only thing we might hear outside of nature is an occasional airplane fly overhead.
Yeah.
Do we have enough of those places in Indiana today?
We don't, but we do have them in the southern central part of the state because, again, our forefathers 100 years ago started buying land there. And so today, in the south central part of the state, there's about 380,000, almost 400,000 acres of public land. Some of it in large enough blocks that when you get back into the heart of them, you can't hear any roads, you can't hear any cars.
But you get off the trail and you're really violating the forest
rangers. That's what the state parks, they won't let you go off trail, and in the national forest and the state forest, they're trying to, particularly the state forest, log everywhere. So they're trying to put roads everywhere so that you can't ever get far from a road. So that and so
this
they're
is what
destroying.
concerns me, is that we're on a downturn when we were on an upturn.
Yeah.
So viewers, please listen to this passionate man, Jeff Stant, who's worked all of his life advocating for us, not just the forests, not just the wildlife, but for us.
Thank you.
I want to thank you so much. And I know, I just have chills. I know, Jeff, that you've planted a seed, and in a seed is the template already of a full-grown tree. So the seed you've planted today will grow into this beautiful vision you have.
All right. Well, thanks for the encouragement.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.